The morning sun cast long shadows across the military airbase as Captain Sarah Chun walked toward the briefing room. Her boots clicked against the concrete with measured precision, each step reflecting the discipline that had carried her through years of rigorous training. At 28, she had already broken several records in flight school and earned her place among the elite fighter pilot squadron. But today would test more than her flying skills. As she entered the briefing room, the conversations died down. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward her, some curious, others skeptical. She was the only woman in this particular squadron, transferred in just 3 days ago from another base. The men had heard rumors about her exceptional performance, but seeing her in person was different. She appeared smaller than they had imagined, her frame lean and compact, built more like a marathon runner than the typical image of a fighter pilot. Commander Reynolds stood at the front of the room, a weathered man in his 50s whose gray temples spoke of decades in military aviation. He had seen many young pilots come and go, but something about Chun's file had caught his attention. Her test scores were nearly perfect, her reaction times among the fastest on record, and her tactical thinking had impressed even the most senior instructors. "Gentlemen and lady," Reynolds began, nodding toward Sarah, "we have a new addition to our squadron. Captain Chien comes to us with outstanding credentials." He gestured for her to step forward. "Captain, would you like to introduce yourself to the team?" Sarah moved to the center of the room with quiet confidence. She had done this before at other bases, but each time brought its own challenges. "I'm Captain Sarah Chun," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I've been flying for 8 years with over 2,000 hours of flight time. I'm here to do my job and support this squadron's mission." Lieutenant Marcus Torres, a pilot known for his sharp tongue and competitive nature, leaned back in his chair. He had been with the squadron for 3 years and considered himself one of the top pilots. The idea of a female pilot joining their tight-knit group didn't sit well with him, especially one who apparently thought she could match their performance. "What's your call sign, Captain?" Torres asked, his tone carrying a hint of mockery that others in the room immediately recognized. Sarah had been expecting this question. Call signs were sacred in military aviation, earned through actions, personality traits, or memorable incidents. They weren't chosen lightly, and they stuck with pilots throughout their careers. "Viper Falcon," she replied without hesitation. The room erupted in barely contained snickers. Torres couldn't hide his smirk as he exchanged glances with the other pilots. "Viper Falcon?" he repeated, emphasizing each word. "That sounds like something from a video game. Did you pick that yourself?" Sarah's expression remained unchanged, but those who looked closely could see the slight tightening around her eyes. "It was given to me," she said simply. "Must have been some story," Torres continued, enjoying the attention from his fellow pilots. "Let me guess, you swooped down on some training exercise like a bird of prey?" Several pilots chuckled, but Commander Reynolds raised his hand for silence. He had read Chin's complete file, including the classified sections that contained the real story behind her call sign. What these men didn't know could fill a book, and he wondered how they would react when they learned the truth. "That's enough, Torres," Reynolds said firmly. "Call signs are earned, not explained for entertainment." But Torres wasn't finished. "Come on, Commander. We all know how some people get their call signs. Sometimes it's wishful thinking more than actual performance." The implication was clear, and Sarah felt the familiar burn of frustration that came with being underestimated. Because of her gender, the other pilots watched the exchange with interest. This wasn't uncommon when new members joined the squadron, especially someone with a call sign that sounded as dramatic as Viper Falcon. They assumed it was probably given ironically or as a joke. The way many call signs originated. Sarah took a deep breath, remembering the words of her first commanding officer, "Let your flying do the talking." She had learned early in her career that responding to every slight or challenge with words was exhausting and often counterproductive. Actions spoke louder than explanations. "I understand there might be questions about my capabilities," she said, addressing the room. "I'm ready to prove myself through my performance, not through stories." Reynolds nodded approvingly. "Excellent attitude, Captain. You'll get that chance soon enough. He turned to address the entire room. We have a training exercise scheduled for tomorrow morning. It'll be a good opportunity for everyone to see how we work together as a team. As the briefing concluded and pilots began filing out of the room, Sarah gathered her materials methodically. She could feel the eyes on her, hear the whispered conversations that pilots thought she couldn't hear. Terms like diversity hire and publicity stunt reached her ears, but she kept her expression neutral. Torres lingered near the door, still smiling at his perceived victory. Looking forward to seeing Viper Falcon in action tomorrow, he called out as he left, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Commander Reynolds approached Sarah as the room emptied. Don't let them get to you, Shan. They'll come around. I'm not worried, sir, Sarah replied, and she meant it. She had faced skepticism before, and she knew that tomorrow's exercise would be the first step in earning their respect. What these pilots didn't know was that her call sign wasn't born from a training exercise or a moment of bravado. It came from something much more serious, something that had tested her in ways that no simulation or training scenario ever could. As she walked back to her quarters, Sarah reflected on the irony of the situation. The very call sign they mocked would soon become a reminder of why underestimating someone based on appearances was a dangerous mistake in their line of work. The alarm clock buzzed at 0500 hours, but Sarah was already awake, staring at the ceiling of her temporary quarters. She had learned long ago that the night before a significant flight brought restless sleep, not from nervousness but from anticipation. Today would be her first real test with the squadron, and she knew every move would be scrutinized. After a quick shower and breakfast, she made her way to the flight line where the morning air carried the familiar scent of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid. The F-16 Fighting Falcons stood in perfect rows, their sleek forms gleaming in the early sunlight. These weren't just machines to Sarah. They were extensions of her body and mind, tools that responded to her slightest touch with incredible power and precision. The other pilots were already gathering around. Commander Reynolds for the mission briefing. Sarah noticed how they formed a natural circle, leaving a small gap that felt more like exclusion than inclusion. She took her place in the formation and focused on the commander's words. Today's exercise is a 4 versus 4 air combat scenario, Reynolds announced, pointing to a large tactical display. We'll be simulating an intercept mission against an incoming threat. The red team will attempt to penetrate our airspace and reach their target. The blue team will prevent that from happening. Sarah studied the mission parameters carefully. It was a complex scenario that would test not just individual flying skills, but teamwork, communication, and tactical thinking. She noticed that Torres had been assigned as red team leader, while she was placed on the blue team under Lieutenant Jake Morrison, a quiet but skilled pilot who had been with the squadron for 2 years. "Chun," Reynolds called out. "You'll be flying wing position for Morrison. Stay tight, follow his lead, and communicate clearly. Morrison, bring her into the formation smoothly." Torres couldn't resist another jab. "Hope Viper Falcon can keep up," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "These aren't training jets anymore." Sarah didn't respond, but Morrison stepped closer to her. "Ignore him," he said quietly. "Focus on the mission. Torres is a good pilot, but he lets his ego get in the way sometimes." Within an hour, all 8 pilots were strapped into their aircraft, running through pre-flight checks with methodical precision. Sarah's hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, checking systems, testing communications, and preparing her mind for what was to come. The familiar routine calmed her, bringing her into the focused state she needed for combat flying. "Blue team, this is Blue Leader," Morrison's voice crackled through her headset. "Radio check?" "Blue 2 loud and clear," Sarah responded, her voice professional and calm. "Blue 3, good copy." "Blue 4, ready for action." The tower cleared them for takeoff, and one by one, the F-16S roared down the runway and into the morning sky. Sarah felt the familiar rush as her aircraft lifted off, the ground falling away beneath her as she climbed toward their assigned altitude. Flying had always been more than a job to her. It was a calling that demanded everything she had to give. The exercise began with both teams positioning themselves according to their tactical plans. Sarah maintained perfect formation with Morrison, her aircraft positioned slightly behind and to the right of his. Through her canopy, she could see the other blue team members taking their positions, while the red team disappeared into the distance to begin their approach. Blue team. We have multiple contacts bearing 270. Range 60 miles and closing, the controller's voice announced. Your mission is to intercept and neutralize the threat. Morrison immediately began issuing orders. Blue 2, stay with me. We'll take the northern approach. Blue 3 and 4, swing wide to the south and come at them from their flank. Sarah acknowledged the command and adjusted her position, keeping her eyes constantly moving between her instruments. The sky around her and Morrison's aircraft. This kind of tactical flying required split-second decisions and perfect coordination between team members. As they closed with the red team, the real test began. Torres was known for his aggressive flying style and creative tactics. He wouldn't make this easy for them. Sarah's radar screen began lighting up with contacts as the two formations approached each other at a combined speed of over 1,000 miles per hour. Blue leader, I have visual on the lead bandit, Sarah reported, spotting Torres's aircraft first due to her position. Good eye. Blue 2, maintain position and be ready to break on my command? What happened next would be talked about in pilot-ready rooms for months to come. Torres, confident in his abilities and eager to embarrass the new pilot, made a tactical error that Sarah spotted immediately. In his eagerness to engage Morrison's aircraft, he left his wingman exposed and created an opening that a less experienced pilot might have missed. Sarah saw it instantly. Her years of training and combat experience kicked in, and she recognized the pattern. Torres was setting up for a classic high-side attack, but he was so focused on Morrison that he hadn't noticed how his maneuver would expose his entire formation to a counterattack. Blue leader, request permission to break formation, Sarah said calmly. Morrison hesitated for a split second. Breaking formation was risky, especially with a new pilot, but something in Sarah's tone told him she had seen something he hadn't. Permission granted. Blue 2, make it count. What Sarah did next would later be analyzed by flight instructors and used as an example of tactical brilliance. Instead of following Torres's aircraft as he expected, she used her superior position to attack his wingman while simultaneously setting up Morrison for a clean shot on Torres himself. It was a move that required perfect timing, spatial awareness, and the confidence to execute a complex maneuver while traveling at hundreds of miles per hour. The exercise lasted another 15 minutes, but the outcome was decided in those first few moments of engagement. The blue team achieved a decisive victory, with Sarah accounting for 2 confirmed kills and assisting on a third. Torres found himself shot down within the first 5 minutes of combat. As they headed back to base, the radio chatter was subdued. Torres, normally quick with post-mission commentary, remained silent. The other pilots were processing what they had just witnessed. The new pilot with the video game call sign had just outflown some of the squadron's most experienced aviators. The debriefing room fell silent as Commander Reynolds finished reviewing the flight data from the morning's exercise. The large screen displayed the tactical movements of all 8 aircraft, showing every turn, climb, and engagement in precise detail. What the data revealed was undeniable. Captain Chun had executed maneuvers that most pilots would consider impossible under those circumstances. Torres sat in the front row, his usual confident demeanor replaced by confusion and frustration. He had been flying combat missions for 5 years, had earned decorations for his skill, and prided himself on being one of the squadron's top pilots. Being outmaneuvered so completely by someone he had dismissed as inexperienced was a blow to his professional pride. Let's walk through the engagement sequence, Reynolds said, using a laser pointer to trace the aircraft movements on the screen. At 0847 hours, Red Team initiated their attack pattern. Blue Leader correctly identified the threat and began positioning for intercept. The display showed Morrison's F-16 turning to engage the incoming aircraft while Sarah maintained formation. Everything appeared standard until the moment she requested permission to break formation. "Here's where things get interesting," Reynolds continued. Blue 2 requested and received permission to break formation at 084915. Watch what happens next. The screen showed Sarah's aircraft suddenly diving and turning in what appeared to be an impossible maneuver. Her F-16 dropped below the engagement, level, rolled inverted, and came up behind the red team's formation in a position that gave her clear shots on 2 targets while simultaneously drawing fire away from Morrison. Lieutenant Hayes, one of the more experienced pilots, leaned forward in his chair. "Sir, how did she pull that off without losing consciousness? The G-forces from that maneuver should have been enormous." Reynolds looked at Sarah, who had remained quietly seated in the back row throughout the debriefing. "Captain Chun, would you care to explain your tactical thinking?" All eyes turned to Sarah as she stood up. She had hoped to avoid being the center of attention, but the question was legitimate. Her fellow pilots deserved to understand what they had witnessed. "The red team leader was setting up for a high-side attack," she began, her voice calm and analytical. "His focus was entirely on blue leader, which created a blind spot. I recognized the pattern and realized that if I could get below his formation quickly enough, I could attack his wingman while he was committed to his own attack run." Torres couldn't contain himself any longer. "That dive you made was reckless. You could have lost control or blacked out from the G-forces." Sarah looked at him directly. "The maneuver was well within operational limits for the F-16, I maintained. Consciousness throughout and had full control of my aircraft." "How?" Torres pressed. "I've tried similar maneuvers in training, and the G-forces are brutal." This was the question Sarah had been dreading. The answer would require her to explain something she had never discussed with this squadron, something that touched on the real origin of her call sign. Reynolds sensed her hesitation. "Captain, your G-force tolerance is noted in your file as exceptional. Perhaps you could share some insight into your training methods?" Sarah took a deep breath. She had learned to be selective about what she shared regarding her background, but these pilots deserved honesty from their teammate. "I have an unusually high tolerance for forces," she said simply. "It's partly natural physiology and partly the result of specialized training I received early in my career." Morrison, who had been quiet throughout the debriefing, spoke up. "What kind of specialized training?" Sarah glanced at Reynolds, who gave her an encouraging nod. "I was selected for an experimental program 3 years ago. The training was designed to push human limits in high-performance aircraft. Part of that involved extensive G-force conditioning." What she didn't say was that the program had been classified, that only 12 pilots had been selected from thousands of applicants, and that the training had been so intense that 3 participants had dropped out. The program had been designed to create pilots who could perform in situations that would incapacitate ordinary aviators. Torres was still skeptical. "Even with special training, what you did today was beyond normal human capabilities." "Maybe that's because I'm not trying to be normal," Sarah replied quietly. "I'm trying to be the best pilot I can be." The room fell silent again as her words sank in. These were all exceptional pilots, men who had dedicated their lives to mastering their craft. But there was something different about Chun's approach, a level of commitment and capability that went beyond what they had encountered before. Hayes raised another question. "Your call sign, Viper Falcon." "Where did that come from?" This was the question Sarah had been hoping to avoid. Her call sign wasn't something she discussed casually, and certainly not something she used to impress other pilots. But the way the morning had unfolded, she realized that her squadron mates were going to keep pushing until they had answers. "It's a long story," she said, hoping to deflect. "We've got time," Torres said, his tone less mocking than before but still challenging. Reynolds intervened. "Gentlemen, call signs are personal. Captain Chun doesn't owe us explanations about her background beyond what's relevant to squadron operations." But Sarah surprised everyone by continuing. "It's okay, Commander. They have a right to understand who they're flying with." She moved to the front of the room, gathering her thoughts. What she was about to share would change how these pilots saw her and possibly how they saw themselves. 3 years ago, I was deployed to a forward operating base in a classified location. I was part of a 2-aircraft patrol when we encountered an unexpected situation. Enemy aircraft had infiltrated our airspace, and we were the only interceptors in position to respond. The room grew completely quiet. This wasn't the kind of story they had been expecting. My wingman was shot down in the first engagement. His parachute deployed, but he landed in hostile territory. I had a choice: return to base and wait for a rescue mission, or try to provide air support until help could arrive. Torres found himself leaning forward, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine interest. I chose to stay, Sarah continued. For the next 47 minutes, I engaged multiple enemy aircraft while providing cover for search and rescue operations. The terrain was mountainous, which allowed me to use hit-and-run tactics, diving into valleys and climbing rapidly to attack and then disappear. She paused, remembering the intensity of that day, the way her aircraft had responded to her commands as if it were an extension of her own body. The other pilots in the area started calling my aircraft the Viper in the Mountains, because of the way I would strike and disappear. But when the mission reports were filed, someone noted that my tactical pattern resembled the hunting behavior of both a Viper and a Falcon. The name stuck. The silence in the room was profound. These pilots understood the significance of what she had described. A 47-minute engagement against multiple enemy aircraft alone was the stuff of legend in their community. The weight of Sarah's revelation settled over the debriefing room like a heavy blanket. The pilots who had been joking about her call sign just hours earlier now found themselves processing the reality of what she had accomplished. A solo engagement against multiple enemy aircraft for nearly an hour was beyond what most of them had ever experienced. Even in their most challenging missions, Lieutenant Morrison was the first to break the silence. "Did you get your wingman out?" Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Yes, the rescue team reached him, and he made a full recovery. He's still flying, stationed in Germany now." Torres, who had been leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed, slowly sat forward. His entire perspective had shifted in the space of a few minutes. The woman he had dismissed as someone who probably got her call sign from a training exercise had actually earned it in real combat, under circumstances that would have challenged the most experienced pilots in their squadron. "How many enemy aircraft?" Hayes asked quietly. 7 confirmed contacts over the course of the engagement, Sarah replied. "I was able to down 3 and damage 2 others before additional friendly forces arrived." Commander Reynolds watched his pilots' faces carefully. He had known this story would have an impact, but he was pleased to see how quickly they were adjusting their perceptions. Good pilots learn from their mistakes, and great pilots learn from the experiences of others. "Captain Chun's actions that day earned her the Distinguished Flying Cross," Reynolds added. "The mission report is classified, but the basics are in her personnel file." The Distinguished Flying Cross was not an award given lightly. It recognized extraordinary achievement during aerial flight, and every pilot in the room understood its significance. The fact that Sarah had never mentioned it, had never used her decorations to establish credibility, actually made her accomplishment more impressive in their eyes. Torres cleared his throat, clearly struggling with what to say next. "I owe you an apology, Captain. I made assumptions that were completely wrong." Sarah nodded but didn't make a big show of accepting the apology. "We all make judgments based on limited information. That's why we train together, to learn each other's capabilities." "Still," Torres continued, "what I said about your call sign was out of line. I should have known better." The dynamics in the room had completely changed. Where there had been skepticism and barely concealed hostility, there was now respect and curiosity. These pilots were beginning to understand that they had been given an opportunity to learn from someone whose experience went far beyond what any of them had imagined. Morrison spoke up again. "That maneuver you pulled today, diving below the formation like that, was it something you developed during that engagement?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Partly. When you're outnumbered and fighting alone, you have to use every advantage you can find. Terrain, altitude, speed, surprise. You learn to think in 3 dimensions and use the enemy's expectations against them. She moved to the tactical display and used the laser pointer to trace her morning's flight path. Torres was expecting me to follow standard engagement protocols, to stay in formation and approach from a predictable angle. By breaking formation and attacking from below, I used his own tactical assumptions against him. The room erupted in questions as the pilots began to understand the deeper implications of what they had witnessed. This wasn't just exceptional flying. It was tactical innovation based on real combat experience. How do you maintain situational awareness when you're moving that fast in 3 dimensions? Asked Lieutenant Davis, the squadron's youngest pilot. Practice, Sarah replied. But also understanding that the aircraft becomes an extension of your body. When you stop thinking about controlling the plane and start thinking about becoming the plane, your awareness expands. Hayes shook his head in amazement. I've been flying for 8 years and I've never heard anyone describe it that way. Different experiences lead to different perspectives, Sarah said. Combat flying teaches you things that simulation and training exercises can't replicate. The intensity, the stakes, the way your mind and body respond under that kind of pressure. Reynolds decided it was time to move the discussion forward. This brings us to an important point about our squadron operations. We're not just individual pilots flying in formation. We're a team, and every member brings unique skills and experiences to that team. He gestured toward the tactical display where the morning's exercise data was still visible. What you witnessed today was the result of combining Captain Chin's combat experience with Lieutenant Morrison's steady leadership and the rest of the team's coordinated support. No one person won this exercise. The team won it. Torres found himself looking at the flight data with new eyes. He could see now how Sarah's seemingly impossible maneuver had actually been the culmination of careful tactical thinking and years of experience. What had appeared reckless was actually precisely calculated. Captain, he said, would you be willing to share some of your tactical approaches with the rest of us? I mean, if you're comfortable discussing them? Sarah was surprised by the request. She had expected continued skepticism, not a genuine desire to learn from her experience. Of course, we all have things we can teach each other. The next hour passed quickly as the debriefing evolved into an impromptu tactical discussion. Sarah found herself explaining concepts she had developed during her combat missions, while the other pilots shared their own experiences and insights. The conversation was animated but respectful, with everyone contributing to a deeper understanding of aerial combat tactics. As the session concluded, Morrison approached Sarah privately. I want you to know that flying with you today was one of the best experiences I've had as a pilot. The way you handled yourself out there, it was inspiring. Thank you, Sarah replied. You did a great job leading the team. It made my job much easier. Torres, who had been gathering his materials, walked over to join them. Listen, Sean, I want to apologize again. Not just for what I said, but for the attitude behind it. I let my ego get in the way of recognizing a fellow professional. Sarah extended her hand to him. Apology accepted, Torres. We're teammates now. That's what matters. As they shook hands, Torres couldn't help but smile. Viper Falcon. I have to admit, now that I know the real story, it's actually a pretty intimidating call sign. That's the idea, Sarah said with a slight grin. In combat, intimidation can be a tactical advantage. The pilots began filing out of the debriefing room, but the conversations continued in the hallway. Word was already spreading throughout the base about the new pilot who had outflown some of the squadron's best aviators on her first day. But more than her flying skills, people were talking about her humility and professionalism in the face of initial skepticism. 2 weeks after Sarah's arrival, the squadron had settled into a new rhythm. The initial tension had dissolved, replaced by genuine camaraderie and mutual respect. Sarah had proven herself not just as an exceptional pilot, but as a valuable team member who was always willing to share her knowledge and help others improve their skills. The change in Torres was particularly remarkable. The pilot who had initially mocked her call sign had become one of her strongest supporters. He sought out her advice on tactical situations and had even asked her to review his flight techniques. His competitive nature hadn't disappeared, but it had been redirected into constructive channels. On this particular morning, Commander Reynolds called an emergency briefing. The pilots filed into the room with the serious expressions that always accompanied unscheduled meetings. Reynolds stood at the front with a grim look on his face and a stack of classified documents in his hands. "Gentlemen and lady," he began, "we have a situation. At 0300 hours this morning, a commercial airliner went down in hostile territory approximately 200 miles from here. The aircraft was carrying a diplomatic delegation, including several high-ranking government officials. The room grew completely silent as the implications sank in. A downed aircraft in hostile territory meant rescue operations, and rescue operations in that environment meant danger for everyone involved. Search and rescue operations are already underway," Reynolds continued, "but the area is heavily defended. Intelligence reports indicate significant anti-aircraft capabilities in hostile ground forces. We need to provide air cover for the rescue teams." He moved to the tactical display and brought up a map of the region. The terrain was mountainous and complex, with deep valleys and steep ridges that would complicate both search operations and air support missions. "This is not a training exercise," Reynolds emphasized. "This is a real-world combat situation with American lives at stake. I need volunteers for what will be an extremely dangerous mission." Every pilot in the room immediately raised their hand. This was what they had trained for, what they had dedicated their careers to accomplishing. But Reynolds had already made his selections based on experience, capability, and the specific requirements of the mission. "Torres, Morrison, Chun, and Hayes," he announced. "You four will form our primary air cover team. Chun, I'm designating you as flight leader for this mission." The announcement surprised everyone, including Sarah. She had been with the squadron for only 2 weeks, and being named flight leader over more senior pilots was unusual. But Reynolds had his reasons. "Sir," Torres said, "I don't question the decision, but why Chun as flight leader?" Reynolds looked at each of the selected pilots before answering. "Because she has the most relevant combat experience for this type of mission. She's faced similar situations before and knows how to adapt tactics to changing circumstances." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Leading a mission was different from being part of one. The lives of her fellow pilots, the rescue teams, and the crash survivors would all depend on the decisions she made in the coming hours. "What's our timeline, Commander?" she asked. "You launch in 90 minutes. Weather is deteriorating, and we need to get those survivors out before nightfall. Intelligence suggests the hostile forces are converging on the crash site, so time is critical." The next hour was a blur of mission planning, equipment checks, and tactical discussions. Sarah found herself drawing on memories of her previous combat experience, recalling lessons learned in similar situations. The mountainous terrain reminded her of the engagement that had earned her call sign. But this mission would be more complex. As the 4 pilots suited up and conducted final equipment checks, Torres approached Sarah privately. "I want you to know that I'm completely comfortable with you leading this mission. After what I've seen these past 2 weeks, I trust your judgment completely." "Thanks, Marcus," Sarah replied, using his first name for the first time. "I'm going to need everyone at their best today." Morrison and Hayes joined them as they completed their preparations. The mood was serious but confident. These pilots had trained together extensively over the past 2 weeks, and they had developed the kind of trust and understanding that was essential for dangerous missions. "Remember," Sarah said as they headed toward their aircraft, "our job is to provide cover for the rescue teams. We're not there to engage in unnecessary combat, but we need to be prepared for anything. Stay alert, communicate constantly, and follow my lead." The 4 F-16s launched into an overcast sky, their engines roaring as they climbed toward their mission altitude. Sarah felt the familiar focus that came with combat flying, her mind clearing of everything except the immediate requirements of the mission. Behind her, 3 of the squadron's best pilots followed in perfect formation. As they approached the area of operations, the radio crackled with updates from the rescue teams on the ground. The crash site had been located and survivors had been confirmed, but hostile forces were closing in. The rescue helicopters needed air cover to complete their mission safely. "Flight, this is Rescue 1, came a voice over the radio. "We have visual on the crash site and are beginning extraction operations. We need immediate air cover. Hostile ground forces are approximately 10 minutes out." Sarah's mind immediately shifted into tactical mode. 10 minutes wasn't much time, but it would have to be enough. She scanned the terrain below, noting the ridgelines, valleys, and potential attack routes that enemy forces might use. "Copy, Rescue 1, she replied. "Viper flight is on station and ready to provide cover. What's your extraction timeline?" "We need 15 minutes minimum to get all survivors loaded and clear of the area." 15 minutes of extraction time against hostile forces that would arrive in 10. Sarah quickly calculated their options and began formulating a plan that would give the rescue teams the time they needed. "Viper 2, 3, and 4, she called to her wingman. "We need to buy the rescue team an extra 5 minutes. I'm going to need you to trust me on this one." Torres's voice came through clearly. "We're with you, Viper 1. What's the plan?" Sarah smiled grimly inside her helmet. What she was about to propose would require everything they had learned about working together as a team. It would also require the kind of tactical innovation that had become her trademark. "We're going to use the terrain to create multiple engagement zones," she explained as she began positioning the flight. "Instead of staying together, we're going to spread out and use hit-and-run tactics to keep the enemy guessing about our numbers and positions." It was a risky strategy that went against conventional fighter tactics, but Sarah knew it was their best chance of success. The mountainous terrain would provide cover for quick attacks and rapid withdrawals, allowing 4 aircraft to appear like a much larger force. "Remember," she added, "we're not trying to destroy everything. We just need to delay and confuse them long enough for the rescue to be completed." The next 23 minutes would be remembered as one of the most expertly executed air support missions in recent military history. Sarah's unconventional tactics, combined with her team's precise execution, created exactly the kind of confusion and delay that the rescue operation needed. "Viper 2, take the northern ridge," Sarah commanded as she spotted the first signs of hostile ground forces moving toward the crash site. "Use the valley for cover and hit their lead vehicles. Viper 3, swing wide to the east and attack their flanks. Viper 4, stay high and provide overwatch." The 4 F-16s scattered across the mountainous terrain like pieces on a chessboard, each pilot understanding their role in Sarah's larger strategy. What the enemy ground forces saw was chaos, aircraft appearing from multiple directions, striking quickly, and disappearing behind ridgelines before effective countermeasures could be deployed. Torres dove into the northern valley, his aircraft skimming just above the treetops as he approached the enemy convoy. "Viper 2 engaging lead vehicles," he reported calmly. Despite traveling at over 400 miles per hour through terrain that left no room for error, his first attack run was textbook perfect, destroying 2 vehicles and forcing the entire convoy to halt and take defensive positions. But instead of pressing the attack, he followed Sarah's plan and disappeared behind the ridge, leaving the enemy wondering where the next attack would come from. "Excellent work, Viper 2, Sarah called. "Viper 3, your turn." Hayes appeared from the east like a ghost, his F-16 emerging from a narrow valley to attack the convoy's flank before vanishing again behind another ridgeline. The enemy forces, already shaken by Torres's attack, found themselves facing what appeared to be coordinated strikes from multiple squadrons. Meanwhile, Morrison maintained high altitude, providing critical intelligence about enemy movements and ensuring that no hostile aircraft entered the area. "Viper 1, I have eyes on additional ground forces approaching from the southwest. Looks like reinforcements." Sarah processed this information quickly. More enemy forces meant greater danger for the rescue operation, but it also presented an opportunity. If she could coordinate her attacks properly, she might be able to delay both the original forces and the reinforcements. "Copy, Viper 4, continue monitoring." Viper flight, we're going to expand our engagement zone. I want the enemy to think they're facing a full squadron. What followed was a masterclass in tactical aviation. Sarah led her team through a series of coordinated attacks that appeared random to the enemy, but were actually precisely planned to create maximum confusion with minimum risk. Each pilot struck at carefully selected targets, withdrew quickly, and repositioned for the next engagement. The key to the strategy was timing and communication. Sarah coordinated every move, ensuring that attacks occurred in rapid succession from different directions, preventing the enemy from establishing effective defensive positions or predicting where the next strike would come from. Viper 1. This is Rescue 2, came an urgent call from the second rescue helicopter. We're taking heavy ground fire from the eastern ridge. Can you provide immediate support? Sarah didn't hesitate. Viper 3, divert to support Rescue 2, hit those positions on the eastern ridge. Hayes rolled his aircraft into a steep dive, targeting the enemy positions that were threatening the rescue helicopters. His attack was precise and devastating, silencing the hostile fire and allowing the rescue operation to continue. Rescue 2? You're clear to continue operations, Hayes reported as he pulled out of his attack dive, but the mission was far from over. The enemy forces, despite being confused and delayed by the air attacks, were still advancing toward the crash site. Sarah realized they needed to escalate their tactics to buy more time for the rescue teams. Viper flight, we're going to try something new, she announced. I want all 4 aircraft to converge on the main enemy force simultaneously, but from different altitudes and directions. Make it look like a full-scale squadron assault. It was a dangerous maneuver that required split-second timing and absolute trust between the pilots. If they miscalculated, they could end up targeting each other instead of the enemy. But Sarah's team had developed a kind of coordination that made such complex tactics possible. Viper 2, approach from the north at low level. Viper 3, come in from the east at medium altitude. Viper 4, descend from high altitude on the western approach. I'll take the southern route. Execute on my mark. The 4 F-16S converged on the enemy position like the fingers of a closing fist. To the hostile forces below, it appeared as if they were being attacked by an overwhelming force. Vehicles scattered in all directions as the pilots delivered precisely targeted strikes that disrupted the entire enemy formation. Viper 1, this is Rescue 1, came a welcome call over the radio. All survivors are aboard and we're clear of the crash site. Outstanding work up there. Sarah felt a surge of relief, but the mission wasn't complete until the rescue helicopters were safely out of the area. Copy, Rescue 1. Viper flight will provide cover until you're clear of hostile territory. The next 10 minutes involved escorting the rescue helicopters through dangerous airspace while continuing to monitor and suppress enemy ground forces. Sarah's team maintained their protective formation, ready to engage any threats that might emerge. As they finally cleared hostile territory and the rescue helicopters headed toward safety, Sarah allowed herself a moment to appreciate what her team had accomplished. They had successfully delayed a superior enemy force, protected a complex rescue operation, and ensured the safe extraction of all crash survivors. Viper flight. Outstanding mission. Commander Reynolds' voice came over the radio. All aircraft returned to base immediately. As the 4 F-16s formed up for the flight home, Torres broke radio protocol slightly. Viper 1, that was the most incredible flying I've ever been part of. The way you coordinated those attacks was pure genius. Morrison and Hayes quickly added their agreement. They had just participated in a mission that would be studied and analyzed for years to come, and they knew they had been led by someone truly exceptional. It wasn't just me, Sarah replied modestly. That mission succeeded because we worked as a team. Every one of you executed perfectly under extremely difficult conditions. But privately, she knew that something special had happened during those 23 minutes over hostile territory. Her squadron mates had followed her lead without question, trusting her tactical decisions even when they seemed unconventional or risky. That kind of trust wasn't given lightly in the military aviation community. As they approached their home base, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since her arrival 2 weeks earlier. The pilots who had initially questioned her capabilities had just followed her through one of the most challenging missions any of them had ever flown. The call sign they had mocked was now associated with tactical brilliance and exceptional leadership under pressure. 3 months later, the squadron gathered in the same briefing room where Sarah had first been introduced to her new teammates. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. The walls were now decorated with photos from successful missions, and a large banner hung across the back wall reading Squadron of the Year, an honor they had earned through a series of outstanding operations, Commander. Reynolds stood at the front of the room with a broad smile, holding a folder of commendation letters and medal recommendations. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I have some announcements that I think you'll find interesting." The pilots sat quietly, but there was an undercurrent of excitement in the room. Word had been circulating that their recent missions had attracted attention from the highest levels of military command. "First," Reynolds continued, "I'm pleased to announce that Captain Chen has been recommended for promotion to Major, effective immediately." The promotion board was unanimous in their decision, citing exceptional leadership and tactical innovation. The room erupted in applause as Sarah's squadron mates congratulated her. Torres stood up and started clapping enthusiastically, followed quickly by Morrison, Hayes, and every other pilot in the room. The woman they had initially doubted was now being recognized as one of the Air Force's rising stars. "Additionally," Reynolds said, raising his hand for quiet, "Captain Chun has been selected to attend the prestigious Advanced Fighter Tactics School. She be training with the top 1% of military pilots from around the world." This announcement drew even more applause. The Advanced Fighter Tactics School was legendary in aviation circles, accepting only the most exceptional pilots for training in cutting-edge aerial warfare techniques, but Reynolds wasn't finished. "Finally, I've been authorized to share some classified information about our recent missions. The rescue operation we conducted 3 months ago has been classified as one of the most successful air support missions in recent history. The tactical innovations employed during that mission are now being studied and incorporated into training programs throughout the Air Force." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and humility as she absorbed this information. What had started as a desperate improvisation to save lives was now being used to train future generations of pilots. Torres raised his hand. "Sir, does this mean other squadrons are going to learn Viper Falcon's tactics?" Reynolds nodded. "The mission has been codenamed Operation Viper Strike in official documents. Captain Chen's approach to multi-axis engagement in mountainous terrain is being taught to flight leaders across multiple commands." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The call sign that Torres had once mocked was now being used to identify innovative tactics that would save lives in future missions. After the formal briefing ended, the pilots gathered around Sarah to offer personal congratulations. The transformation in their relationships had been complete and profound. These men who had initially seen her as an outsider now considered her family. "You know," Morrison said thoughtfully, "when you first walked into this room, I thought we were just getting another pilot. I had no idea we were getting someone who would change how we think about flying." Hayes nodded in agreement. "The things you've taught us about three-dimensional thinking and using terrain to our advantage have made all of us better pilots." Torres, who had become one of Sarah's closest friends in the squadron, grinned widely. "I have to admit something. When I first heard your call sign, I thought it sounded like something from a movie. Now, when I hear Viper Falcon, I think about precision, innovation, and the kind of pilot I want to become." Sarah looked around at her teammates. These skilled aviators who had become more than just fellow pilots. They were now trusted partners who would follow her into any dangerous situation because they knew she would do everything possible to bring them home safely. "When I first arrived here," she said quietly, "I was just hoping to fit in and do my job. I never expected to find such an incredible group of pilots and friends. Commander Reynolds approached the group with a serious expression. "Major Chun," he said, using her new rank for the first time, "I have one more piece of news. You've been offered a position as a flight instructor at the Advanced Fighter Tactics School. It's an opportunity to shape the next generation of combat pilots." The offer was both an honor and a difficult decision. Teaching at the Advanced Fighter Tactics School was the pinnacle of a military aviation career, but it would mean leaving the squadron that had become her second family. "I appreciate the offer, sir," Sarah replied, "but I'd like some time to consider it. This squadron has become very important to me." Torres immediately spoke up. "Don't even think about turning it down because of us. This is your chance to influence pilots all over the world. Think about how many lives you could save by teaching your tactics to hundreds of flight leaders." Morrison nodded emphatically. "He's right. You've already made us all better pilots. Now you have the chance to do the same thing on a much larger scale." Sarah realized they were right, but the decision was still difficult. The bonds she had formed with this squadron went beyond professional relationships. "If I do accept the position," she said slowly, "I want you all to know that everything I learned here, everything we accomplish together will be part of what I teach. You won't just be my former squadron mates. You'll be part of a legacy that influences military aviation for years to come." Hayes smiled broadly. "You mean we're all going to be famous? You mean you're all going to be responsible for training pilots who might face life-and-death situations?" Sarah corrected. "That's both an honor and a responsibility that I hope you're ready for." As the afternoon wore on and the formal ceremonies concluded, the squadron gathered for their traditional celebration dinner. The conversation flowed easily between war stories, technical discussions, and good-natured teasing. But there was an underlying current of respect and affection that hadn't existed when Sarah first arrived, later that evening. As Sarah walked across the flight line one last time before making her decision about the instructor position, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From being dismissed as someone with a video game call sign to becoming a recognized tactical innovator and leader, the transformation had been remarkable, but perhaps more important than personal recognition was the realization that she had found her true calling, not just as a pilot, but as someone who could help others reach their full potential. Whether that meant leading a squadron through dangerous missions or teaching future generations of aviators, she knew that her purpose was to use her skills and experience to save lives and protect others. The next morning, Sarah knocked on Commander Reynolds' office door with her decision. She had accepted the instructor position, but with one condition she wanted to maintain connections with her squadron and continue collaborating on tactical development. "I think that can be arranged," Reynolds said with a smile. "After all, the best instructors are the ones who never stop learning themselves." As news of Sarah's decision spread throughout the base, pilots from other squadrons began approaching her with questions about tactics and leadership. The call sign Viper Falcon had become synonymous with innovation and excellence, inspiring others to push the boundaries of what they thought possible. Years later, when military historians wrote about this period in aviation history, they would note that Major Sarah Chun's influence extended far beyond her personal achievements. She had demonstrated that true leadership meant not just excelling individually, but elevating everyone around her to perform at levels they never thought possible. The pilots who had once mocked her call sign had become her greatest advocates. Carrying her lessons and innovations to squadrons around the world, the name Viper Falcon was no longer just a call sign. It had become a symbol of what could be achieved when skill, determination, and humility combined to create something greater than the sum of its parts.